My name is Michael Carter. I'm 28 years old now, but this story started when I was just 22. Back then, if someone had asked me what I wanted out of life, I would have answered with a simple nothing. And it wasn't a dramatic or sarcastic response. It was honest. I just couldn't find it in me to want anything, not even to get out of bed in the morning. I remember how things started to lose color, little by little. It crept in so quietly that I didn't even notice at first. I used to be the guy who showed up early to college classes. Then I started skipping. Eventually, I stopped leaving my room. My friends, who were once always around, stopped calling. My mom would say, "Michael, you need to get your act together. Don't be lazy." My dad, he just shook his head, disappointed, like he was watching his son waste every opportunity life had given him. And maybe they were right. Or at least that's what I believed back then. I felt weak. I felt like a failure. I slept too much. I cried sometimes for no reason. Other times I just stared at the ceiling for hours. Even brushing my teeth felt like climbing a mountain, and the worst part, I didn't know why I was like this. "You have everything, Michael," my aunt once said. "You're young, healthy, you've got a good family. You just need some willpower." Oh, how I wished for that willpower. I searched every corner of my mind and body for it, but I couldn't find it. I woke up and went to sleep, feeling like I was nothing but a burden. I isolated myself even more, deleted my social media accounts, stopped replying to messages. I didn't celebrate birthdays. Deep down, I felt like no one would miss me anyway. One of my cousins once told me, "Dude, you're just doing this for attention." I didn't respond. To be honest, I didn't even have the energy to argue, and part of me believed it too. I started convincing myself that maybe I was just lazy or weak, and that I'd never be like the other guys my age, those with plans, jobs, and dreams. Then one Sunday, just another grey day after a full week of barely moving, I felt something shift. It wasn't some dramatic spark of hope. It was more like a tired whisper from inside me. I remember staring at the ceiling, the same one I'd been watching for days, and I whispered to myself, "This isn't living." That day, I didn't leap out of bed with triumphant music in the background. I just rolled over, grabbed my phone, and typed into Google, "Why can't I get out of bed?" One of the top results said, "Symptoms of severe depression." I started reading, and the more I read, the more I cried. It was like every sentence was describing exactly what I'd been going through. The exhaustion, the apathy, the worthlessness, the isolation, it was all there. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel so alone. But realizing what it might be didn't immediately fix everything. Honestly, it triggered a storm inside me. Part of me rebelled. "You're just making excuses," I thought. It was hard to accept that I might need help, especially growing up in a home where emotional weakness was treated like a personal flaw. It took me more than 2 weeks to work up the courage to make an appointment with a mental health professional, and just making the call made me cry, because in some way it meant admitting that I wasn't okay. And for someone raised in an environment where you're expected to tough it out, that felt like admitting defeat. What no one knew, not my family, not my friends, not even myself, was that I was fighting something invisible, cruel and silent. And it wasn't laziness, it was depression. One of the most dangerous illnesses there is, because it robs you of the very thing you need to fight it, the will to keep going. Now looking back, I understand that my journey toward healing began that day I searched on Google. That was the first step. A tiny one, maybe meaningless to the outside world, but for me, it was like laying the first brick in a bridge between who I was and who I could become. And that's the bridge I want to tell you about. Every stumble, every setback, but also every single step toward healing. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: no one is lazy just because they can't get out of bed. Sometimes the soul is simply too heavy, If this story is touching you in any way, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This simple gesture means a lot to our work and encourages us to keep sharing real, deep, and human stories. Stories that offer comfort, spark reflection, and remind us that no one is truly alone. Thank you so much for being here. Your presence matters. Always. After I read that article about the symptoms of severe depression, I stayed in bed for hours, just thinking. It felt like someone had finally turned the lights on in a room I'd been stumbling around in for years. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't broken. I was sick. And that realization, as strange as it sounds, gave me a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, what I was feeling had a name. It wasn't just me being dramatic or me being weak. It was depression. Still, saying that word out loud, that was a whole different mountain to climb. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one evening a few days later. My mom was cooking. My dad was in the living room watching the news. The smell of baked chicken filled the room, something I used to love. That night, I couldn't even taste it. I looked down at my plate, pushing the food around with my fork, and suddenly I said, "I think I'm depressed." My voice cracked. My mother stopped mid-movement, holding a wooden spoon over the stove. My father muted the TV. There was silence. Then came the response I had feared most. "Michael," my dad said gently, "everyone gets sad sometimes. You just need to shake it off." It wasn't cruel. He didn't mean harm, but it hit me hard. That response, though well-intentioned, confirmed what I had always felt. No one understood. My mum tried to be supportive. She asked if I wanted to talk to someone. I nodded. That tiny movement felt like lifting a boulder. She offered to help me find a therapist, and we spent the next day looking online together. She was quiet, maybe unsure, but she didn't pull away. That meant more than I could express. A few days later, I sat in the waiting room of a small counseling office downtown. My foot tapped nervously against the floor, my hands were sweating, and I had rehearsed 100 different ways to say how I felt. But when the therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Ellen Myers, greeted me and asked how I was doing, I just said, "I don't know who I am anymore." That was the truth. I had lost myself, the version of me that used to laugh easily, make plans, have dreams. That version had faded, replaced by a numb shadow that barely existed. In that first session, I cried. A lot. I don't even remember all that I said, but I remember how she listened, without judgment, without interruption, without trying to fix me. Week after week, I kept going back, and slowly, painfully, I started peeling back the layers. I talked about the pressure I always felt to be the perfect son, the silent guilt of not living up to expectations, the loneliness that crept in even when I was surrounded by people. And she said something one day that stuck with me. "Michael, you are not your depression. It's something you're experiencing, not something you are." That sentence opened a crack in the wall I had built around myself. During those early weeks of therapy, I began to track small victories. Getting out of bed before noon, showering, responding to a text, eating a full meal. They weren't monumental, but to me, they were milestones. Proof that I was still fighting, even if it didn't look like much on the outside. But it wasn't all progress. Some days I felt like I was back at square one. Days when I couldn't stop crying, nights when sleep wouldn't come. I remember calling Dr. Myers once, nearly in tears, saying, "I thought I was getting better. Why does it still feel like this?" And she told me something that changed how I viewed recovery. Healing is not linear. I clung to those words. They gave me permission to be human, to stumble, to fall, to get back up again, even if slowly. Around this time, I started journaling. It wasn't anything fancy, just scribbles of thoughts. Some days, it was one sentence. Other days, I wrote pages. Writing helped me untangle the mess in my head. It helped me find patterns in my moods, triggers I hadn't noticed before. It also became a conversation with myself, one where I started being kinder, something I hadn't done in years, and little by little I began to see glimpses of someone I thought I had lost forever. Someone who wanted to live, not just exist, not just survive, but truly live. I started taking walks around the neighborhood, at first for 5 minutes, then 10. I'd breathe in the air, watch the leaves dance in the wind, and for moments at a time I'd feel peace. Not joy exactly, but a quiet kind of peace I hadn't known I was missing. Eventually, I started talking to 1 or 2 friends again. I told them the truth, and to my surprise, they didn't back away. One of them, Jordan, even said, "Man, I had no idea. You always seemed like you just didn't care about anything." I laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. "Yeah," I replied, "I didn't care because I didn't know how to feel anymore." That conversation taught me something else. People can't help you if they don't know what you're going through. And sometimes, even just one honest conversation can rebuild a bridge that felt burned forever. There's still more to tell. How I reconnected with myself, how I found meaning again, how I learned that self-compassion is not weakness. It's the foundation of strength. But that came later. This part of the story, it was the beginning of the climb, and I had finally taken the first real steps. The truth is, I used to think that recovery would feel like a moment, a sudden epiphany, a lightning bolt that would light up my mind and heart and bring me back to life all at once. But what I learned is that healing isn't loud, it's quiet. It's slow. It happens in tiny, ordinary moments that don't feel like much at the time. One of those moments came when I started setting alarms again. It sounds so small, doesn't it? But for months, I hadn't cared what time I woke up. Noon, 2 in the afternoon, sometimes 4. The day didn't have any meaning to me, so why should time matter? But I remember one morning, I set an alarm for 10. I didn't get up right away. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything and nothing. At the same time, but I got up and made myself a cup of coffee. It was bitter and too hot, but I held the cup in my hands like it was something sacred, a ritual. Proof that I was still here. That day I made my bed for the first time in forever, not because someone was coming over, not because I needed to, just because I wanted to feel like my space wasn't a reflection of my chaos. And when I finished pulling the blanket tight and placing the pillows in place, I actually smiled. It was small, but it was real. Dr. Myers once told me, "You're building a new relationship with yourself, and like any relationship, it takes time, patience, and kindness." That stuck with me. I had spent so many years being harsh with myself, calling myself useless, lazy, broken. I would never talk to someone else the way I talked to myself, so I started practicing something she called self-compassion. At first, I laughed when she said it. "Talk to myself kindly," I said. "That feels weird," but she said, "You've tried punishing yourself into getting better. Did it work?" No, it hadn't. So I gave kindness a chance. When I had a bad day, instead of spiraling into guilt, I'd try saying, "It's okay, you're having a hard time, but it doesn't mean you've failed." It was awkward, unnatural. But over time, it became part of my inner voice. I started treating myself like someone worth rooting for, someone I wouldn't give up on. And something about that changed everything. Around that time, I joined a support group. Dr. Myers had suggested it more than once, and I always brushed it off. But one night, feeling brave, or maybe just tired of feeling alone, I showed up at a small community center where they met every Tuesday evening. I was nervous, of course. I expected a room full of people sitting in silence or crying non-stop, but instead I found warmth. Real people, people like me, people who had once felt like they were drowning and didn't know why. One woman, Rachel, spoke about how she used to cry in the shower every morning before work, putting on a smile as soon as she stepped outside. A man named Craig said he once stared at a loaf of bread for an hour because even making toast felt impossible. I didn't say much that first night, but I listened, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt seen, I felt understood. I kept going back, week after week. I started sharing little bits of my story, and as I opened up, something amazing happened. My shame started to shrink. The more I spoke about what I'd been through, the less power it had over me. That's when I realized something life-changing. We heal in connection. I had spent so long in isolation, thinking no one could possibly understand what I was going through. But all it took was sitting in a room with others who had walked similar paths to understand that I wasn't broken. I was human. At home, things also began to shift. My mum started asking how my sessions went. She listened more. My dad wasn't always comfortable with emotional conversations, but one evening he said, "I'm proud of you for getting help." I hadn't heard those words in years, and I cried when I did. My friendship with Jordan grew stronger. He became my accountability buddy. We'd go for walks together, send each other reminders to drink water, or check in during tough days. It wasn't grand gestures, just presence, support, and sometimes that's all we need to keep moving forward. And then came a turning point. I decided to go back to school, not full-time, not with any big expectations, just one class at a local community college, something to stretch my mind, to remind myself that I could still learn, still grow. I chose a course in creative writing, something I had always loved as a kid, but abandoned when the darkness took over. The first day I walked into that classroom, I was shaking. But as soon as the professor, a gentle man named Mr. Reynolds, welcomed us with a smile and said, "Everyone has a story to tell," I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. Because I did have a story. A messy one, a painful one, but one that wasn't over, and maybe, just maybe, I could write my way into a future I had once stopped believing in. I didn't know it at the time, but signing up for that writing class would become one of the most important decisions of my life. I thought it would just be a small, safe distraction, an excuse to leave the house and feel productive. But what it gave me was far more than that. It gave me a mirror. Our first assignment was to write a short, personal essay. "It doesn't have to be perfect," Mr. Reynolds said. "It just has to be true." I went home and stared at a blank screen for almost 2 hours. What could I possibly say? Where would I even start? My story didn't have a neat beginning, middle, or end. It just felt like a long, grey stretch of time where I'd been surviving on autopilot. But then I thought about the mornings I couldn't get out of bed, the whispered words to myself, "This isn't living," and I began to type. The words came slowly at first, hesitant, like a wounded animal approaching a helping hand. But then they came faster, raw and honest. I wrote about the silence of my room, the weight of my body, the invisible hand pressing down on my chest. I wrote about shame, guilt, isolation. I wrote about the moment I Googled my symptoms and finally saw the word depression and felt something click. When I finished, I sat back in my chair, trembling. It wasn't just an essay, it was a confession. It was me, peeling off every layer I had wrapped around myself to survive. In class, we had the option to read our essays aloud. At first, I was certain I wouldn't, but something inside me nudged gently. Maybe someone needs to hear this. So I raised my hand. My voice shook the entire time. I couldn't look up. I just read word for word the story of a man who once thought he was lazy, but who had been fighting a silent war every day. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then, one of my classmates, Emily, softly said, "Thank you." Others nodded. One guy, Lucas, came up after class and said, "That was brave. Man, I've been there too. I just never had the words." That moment changed something in me. For so long, I had seen my story as something shameful, a mark of weakness, but now, in that classroom, I saw that it could be something else, something useful, something that connected me to others instead of isolating me. I started writing. More. Not just for class, but for myself. My journal pages grew longer. I wrote poems, letters I'd never send, pieces of memories I had tried to forget. And in doing so, I started rediscovering parts of myself that I thought were lost forever. My creativity had been buried under the weight of depression, but it was still there, alive, waiting patiently. I began to notice other things too. I laughed. More genuinely, I looked people in the eye. I listened with interest. I even started helping around the house again, little things like doing the dishes or taking out the trash. And instead of feeling like chores, they felt like victories. Each task was a way of saying, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm trying, and my body, once so heavy and tired, started feeling different. I still had bad days, of course I did, but I also had better days. Days when I danced a little while making breakfast. Days when I actually looked forward to class. Days when I caught myself smiling for no particular reason. One night, I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, I'm proud of you. It felt strange, surreal, but I meant it. After everything, I meant it. Dr. Myers had once asked me, what would it look like if you treated yourself the way you treat people you love? Back then, I hadn't had an answer. Now I was starting to live it. But there was still one thing I hadn't done. One final hurdle, telling my extended family the truth. The people who had once called me lazy, dramatic, unmotivated, the ones, whose words still echoed in my head, even when I tried to silence them. We were gathering for a family dinner one weekend. It was the first time I'd gone in months. My uncle cracked a joke about how I'd finally crawled out of my cave. Some people laughed. I forced a smile. Then, when things quieted down, I stood up. I want to say something, I said, my heart pounding. I know some of you thought I disappeared because I didn't care or that I was lazy, but the truth is, I was really sick. I was dealing with severe depression, and I didn't even know it. It took everything in me just to get out of bed. You could have heard a pin drop. I'm doing better now, I continued. I'm getting help. I'm back in school, and I'm learning to live again. I don't expect everyone to understand, but I just needed you to hear it from me. Silence. And then my aunt got up, walked over and hugged me tight. I'm sorry, she whispered. I had no idea. One by one, people came over. They didn't always know what to say, but their presence spoke for them. That night, something shifted. I had faced one of the scariest parts of my healing, being vulnerable with the people who had misunderstood me the most, and instead of rejection, I found something else. Compassion. Passion. There's something strange that happens when you start to heal. The world, which once felt like a grey blur, begins to show its colors again, not all at once, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but little by little, in soft light coming through the window, in the sound of laughter that no longer feels distant, in your own voice when you realize you're singing along to a song again without even thinking. That was what healing looked like for me. It wasn't that the depression disappeared. It didn't. I still had days when I woke up and felt that familiar heaviness in my chest. But now I had tools, I had language, I had support, and more than anything, I had awareness. I could recognize the storm before it took over. And that made all the difference. Therapy had become a weekly sanctuary. Writing had become a lifeline. My relationships were growing deeper and more honest, and slowly I began doing something that had once felt impossible. I started dreaming. Again, I began volunteering at the same community center where our support group met. Just small things. Setting up chairs, greeting people, making coffee, but every time someone walked through the door looking lost, uncertain, or exhausted, I recognized the look in their eyes. I had worn it myself, and I wanted them to know they weren't alone. It was during one of those evenings that Dr. Myers pulled me aside after group. She smiled and said, "Michael, have you ever thought about studying mental health? Maybe becoming a counselor someday?" I laughed at first. Me? A counselor? But the idea planted a seed. I thought about the young man I was not long ago, the one who couldn't even say the word depression out loud. The one who Googled his symptoms at 2 in the morning, scared and ashamed. The one who thought his worth was measured by how productive he was. That young man didn't need someone to fix him. He needed someone to sit beside him, to listen without judgment, to remind him that he wasn't broken, just hurting. And maybe I could become that person for someone else. So I enrolled in a few psychology courses the following semester. It felt right. It felt purposeful. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was moving forward with intention. I shared my story in more spaces, at schools, online, in support groups. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had walked through the fire, and I was still standing. And if even one person heard my story and thought, maybe I'm not lazy, maybe I'm struggling, maybe I need help, then it was worth every word. You know, the phrase mental health used to sound so clinical to me, but now it feels deeply human. It's not just about diagnoses and medications. It's about how we care for our hearts, how we listen to ourselves, how we learn to rest, to speak kindly to the mirror, to ask for help without shame. And most of all, how we show up for others. Years later, I still keep that first journal I started during my darkest time. The pages are wrinkled and stained with old coffee rings and tear marks, but it's a reminder of where I've been, a record of the climb. Sometimes I flip to the very first entry. It's only 5 words. I don't know who I am. Now I can answer that. I'm Michael Carter. I'm not lazy, I'm not weak, I'm a survivor, a listener, a friend, a student, a writer. A man who once thought his story was over, but realized it was just the beginning of a new chapter. If you're reading this and you feel like I once did, lost, tired, invisible, I want you to know something. You're not alone. You're not broken. You're not your diagnosis. You're a human being with a story worth telling, and if all you can do today is breathe, that's enough. If all you can manage is to sit up in bed, that's a win. If all you can say is, I'm not okay, then you've already shown incredible strength. This world is better with you in it. And healing, real, honest healing, is possible. I'm living proof.